Hi everyone, I appreciate you taking some time to watch today's video. In today's video, I want to go through some of the tactics and strategies that I go about during really the month of April where I live predominantly. That is my month where the majority of the fish are spawning. So kind of how I go through April and then progressing into the early parts of May and really I guess even the end of March, but kind of looking at it from where exactly are we going as far as the spawn period. So when the bass are on their beds and then that short period of time after and then the short period of time right before. So, you know, we've got this whole deal that's really starting even now in my area of the pre-spawn is getting ready to get kicked off in full swing. So I've already done a video on my pre-spawn tactics that I'll leave a link to up here, and feel free to watch that, and I hope you enjoy that. But here, after they've done their pre-spawn, they've gotten back to their spawning areas, their major flats, their, you know, coves, things of that nature. What are some of the baits to throw to be able to catch them? Okay, so traditionally, you know, with conventional fishing, we would always take, you know, most of the time, worm, a jig, you know, occasionally topwater, something like that. So really what you're going to see here is taking those same concepts with conventional fishing and bringing them upsize into the swim bait category. So let's start with the actual bass are on the bed spawning phase of the spawn. So we'll kind of start there because those types of baits I look at differently than what I would target if I were trying to catch those fish that were coming in and the fish that were already finished spawning. So two different sets of baits here for the spawn, because without a doubt, you know, you have the real two periods of times of the year, the fall and the spring, where the bass are just constantly moving and you've got to try to keep up. So there's two different ways to phase that. If you want to fish more pre-spawn, post-spawn fish, you know, you're going to be fishing a lot of fast-moving reactionary baits, maybe a couple of baits on the bottom, but predominantly you're wanting to move. You got to find them. Once you find them, you can really have a lot of fun really fast, but you got to find them. And then on the other side of that is if you're focusing on those fish that are actually on the bed. It's a little bit different set of baits, at least as to how I approach that. So let's begin talking with the bass that are on the bed, and then we'll kind of walk our way around. So looking at it from a swim bait standpoint, you know, what are some swim baits that would work in that area of the bass are actually on the beds? The first one that I have not heard people talk about, now this may be because they don't work, it may be because people don't do it, or nobody talks about it, but this little bait here, and you know, the Megabass Dark Sleeper, it's a 3-inch swim bait, so I guess you could even argue, is it really, you know, a great deal of a swim bait? But it's a very small little swim bait. You know, they're about 3, well, I think they sell them maybe a 2 up to a 4-inch swim bait. But these swim baits are really neat in the fact that they have a tremendous amount of weight right in the bottom. So when I see this particular color in detail, all I think is bluegill. This is a bluegill. It is getting ready to invade a bass's nest, and it is getting ready to just basically get eaten. Because it's so small, its profile's perfect. A smallmouth can eat this, a largemouth won't have any issues. And then you have this really stout little hook that's kind of hidden, you know, by these little dorsal fins that kind of slide up around it. So to me, this is a great bait to fish the spawn with if you want to actually bed fish, whether you're sight fishing or you're, you know, in my area, our smallmouth spawn deeper. Our smallmouth will spawn anywhere from, let's just say 5 to 10 feet deep. For the most part, that, you know, they spawn on like very slate, rocky, kind of 45-degree angle banks. general rule of thumb there. But you'll find them there and they'll be spawning. And, a little, in our area, a little kind of term that gets known during the smallmouth spawn is it's called the little green worm bite. And you take a 4-inch worm. Traditionally, it used to be the old Berkeley power bait worms. A little 4-inch green pumpkin worm, and you would drag that Texas rigged across their beds and they would eat it. Okay, well, once again, changing that up to a swim bait style and giving something else a try, the Megabass Dark Sleeper. Still basically in that green color on the back, and it just kind of looks like a bluegill. So, different ideas, different thoughts. If you're trying to give the fish something they haven't seen a ton of, that's kind of my approach with the swim bait, is looking for another option. Once again, I'm not saying that I'm the first to think of this by any means. I'm sure there's a lot of people that do this, but throwing a dark sleeper instead of a worm or a jig when bed fishing is also a good technique. Now, the other bait that I would use when bed fishing is definitely the tried and true. This bait, it's accounted for a ton of big fish. I think most people would recognize this bait. This is the 316 mission fish. I think 316 is named after John 3:16, the Bible verse. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. That is this bait's namesake as far as where the company came from, and then the mission fish is the name of the bait itself. So it's a nice little bait, but I've heard in several different interviews Mickey Ellis talk about this bait, and he's talked about this bait. Although you can cast and swim the bait, it wasn't designed for that. He designed this bait actually to be a bottom bumping bait, like a worm. So as you can tell, all of the lead is right here in the head. You can see it. And what you would do is you just throw it out, let it sink to the bottom, let it stand up, and that tail's going to quiver. And then you'll pick it up, and just like a jig or a worm, it's going to hop on the bottom, and it's going to go right over those beds. And for anyone that's kind of familiar with some of the big bass history, I think Dottie, which was the 25-pound bass caught out in California, big largemouth, was caught on a 316 mission fish, and they caught it on the bed. They saw it sight fish and caught it with the mission fish. And I think it was something to do with, and don't quote me on this, but I think it was something like partially due to the California regulation, or maybe it's how they get the world record. I think it was hooked outside of the mouth and they couldn't count it as the world record, but it's the largest bass documented to have been caught, even though it was outside the mouth, a 25-pound bass. I may have that story completely wrong, but I think that's the general idea of what happened there. But my understanding is it was caught on a mission fish. Okay, so now those are my basic baits as far as covering the fish that are actually on the bed spawning if I want to fish slow. So now we kind of get into this other idea of what do you do while the bass are on the beds. One thing that I discovered last year is you can throw a glide bait during this time. Now, what you're doing with this glide bait is you want specific glide bait. You do not want a wide glide, slow, Roman-made mother, Hinkle trout. No, you don't want that kind of glide bait. You're wanting something probably shorter, stockier. I hate giving dimensions because every bait is different as to how they're made and what they're designed for. So let's just say, as a general rule of thumb, probably a 5 to maybe a 7-inch glide bait. That's probably going to be your sweet spot. And you want something that can really cut, that chops hard. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to work it fast, but it needs to be able to be chopped to where it can make these nice fluid little cuts right over top of the bass's head. You know, we all remember the stories of like the poppers, when you would throw a popper on top of a bed real shallow, pop it a couple of times, and it would just irritate the bass and they'd come up and eat it. Well, it's the same idea, but with a big bait. You're throwing a glide bait. You know, this is my bait. This is the Jethro 6.0, and I honestly, I would take the 6.0 during this time period over my 7.5. And the reason being is not because I'm trying to target smaller fish, it's just this bait has a smaller glide than the 7.5. The 7.5 will glide a little bit wider. It's also a bigger bait. I don't have a problem throwing the bigger bait, it's just because how the glide works, it's going to be a little bit more suited for what I'm trying to accomplish. I don't have the tail glued in right now. This is once again a fresh paint up, so I haven't had the tail glued in yet, but it'll be ready for the spawn. You know, that is a color too that I like in the spawn, greens. The reason I really like greens is I think it mimics bluegill really well. I know bluegill, you know, the blue in the name, but I've not really caught a ton of bluegill that are really blue. Most of them have a lot more green in them. And then something kind of like this, it's you know, a little bit of a mix. I kind of call this more of like just a different kind of color of like a green shad or a green gizzard shad. I was calling this Tennessee shad, so but honestly I'm almost partial to start calling it like a bluegill, or green gill. Maybe green gill would work. That I kind of like that name. So those would be the glide baits, but I'm thinking of it, if I'm targeting fish that are actually bedding, I would want something a little bit slower, more of a chopping kind of motion. You know, I've heard good things about the KGB Chad Shad's a great chopping style bait. You know, I think recently when they collaborated with the Spro, I'm unfamiliar with that bait, but if it's similar to the original Chad Shad, from what I understand, it would make a good bait. The other thing is you want a very slow sink rate, because you want that bait, if you do chop it, you want it to just kind of hang out there. Make that bass think that something's invading its territory and it's not planning on leaving. Chop it. Let it see it. Chop it. Let it see it. And, you know, what you can do with this is, rather than trying to, you know, with your dark sleeper, you know, your worm, you know, where you're casting more so at, you know, 90-degree angles to the bank from the boat, parallel the bank. You know the fish are in 5 to 10 foot of water. Well, largemouth could be 5 to 0, or rather 0 to 5, I guess. But parallel the bank, bring it close, and then just let that bait do its thing. You're staying in the strike zone longer, because if the boat's sitting in 20 foot and the fish are at 10 at the max, you've got 10 foot of water that you've got to cover that's just no good. There's no fish there really. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure there's fish there, it's just, you understand what I'm getting at. You're not fishing and keeping that bait in the strike zone to its maximum potential. So that would be one of my other game plans. Instead of going the bottom hopping for fishing for bedfish, I'm fishing a little bit above them, and I'm fishing it with a glide bait. And I'm going slower, yet still able to cover water. And that is my personal style of fishing. That's how I like to fish the spawn. I'll parallel that bank, even on these 45s, putting the boat in 8 to 10 foot of water, cast it, almost hit the bank, you know, within inches, hit it and put it in shallow water and just slow work it. You can cover a lot of water, but you don't have to really fly with it. So there's definitely that option. You know, you do have the soft bait option, and the reason that I like the glide over a soft bait is, in order for that soft bait to work, other than like, you know, your 3/16 mission fish and your dark sleep or something that's designed to actually be worked on the bottom, the way that that bait gets action is on a steady wind. You know, the tail flaps or, you know, kicks as the bait is coming through the water. So you end up having to bring that bait over so many fish, and it's a constant, you know. So it's not really getting to just like sit there in their face and make them annoyed or irritate, make them feel like something's in their territory. And I'm not saying this is for every fish. I'm just saying, in my mind, this is the way that I look at it. I'm sure that a lot of people out there that have fished swim baits far longer than I can honestly say, you know, straight reeling a paddle tail across a bed, phenomenal way to catch fish, and I'm sure it works. It's just that's how my mind thinks, that if I'm able to stay in the strike zone longer, I can get that fish to commit a little bit more frequently. At least, like I said, that's how it is in my mind. And then obviously you just have to let the fish tell you for that specific day if that's what they want. So, all right, and then last, this is the last bait that I would really use for the spawn itself, and this is really going to get kicked off with the spawn, the wake bait. So this is one of the wake baits that my dad had created, and yeah, it's got a lot of like dirt and grime on it, but it works. It's a 12-inch wake bait. Let me see here for reference. For reference, this is a working class 0 citizen. So you can definitely tell that's got a lot of extra length on it. There we go. That's a little bit better. And it's wood. That clack drives fish insane. I don't know why. I don't know if it's the sound per se, or if it's just that constant clack over their head, and it just drives them wild, and they will come up and absolutely maul this. Throwing a big wake bait is a ton of fun. You know, that is, we call that the Happy Pappy. That's its name, the Happy Pappy. It is a, like I said, it's 12-inch wooden wake bait, and they will eat it. Just because it's 12 inches, a fish doesn't care. Here's about a 10-inch rat. I don't have the tail screwed on right now, but all that would be is a trick worm, zoom trick worm, something like that. Probably black, if I had to guess, black or pink. I even like my phthalate, the bright orange. Fish don't care. It gets their attention though. Once again, the sound. There is something about wood with wake baits that I really like. I have resin wake baits, I do, but I'm partial to wood when it comes to my wake baits. I just really like them, and they hold up really good, the wake baits do, and I don't know, I haven't had as many issues with them waterboarding as I have when the glide baits did. So I've had more success there, and they're just naturally buoyant. You know, wood is naturally buoyant. You don't have to weigh these baits to try to come up with that. The key thing is getting the lengths right, as far as how you want those to sit. But this is, one of our rats, and that's about 10, 11 inches. It's not that big. The problem with wood, and this is something that we'll add into it, is if you're trying to throw these, you will have to use generally a heavier gauge rod, because the wood typically weighs more than resin does. But, going back to the fishing portion of this versus just talking about wake baits, slow rolling this, similar to that glide bait, except I'm working it on the surface. The beauty of this bait is I can pause it and just let it sit there, and then I can start it back up and it starts its clack again, and then pause it. So you can kind of see as to how I'm approaching this. I want to be able to incorporate pausing. I want to be able to incorporate, I don't want to say stunned, but it is infiltrating their territory where they are trying to be able to take care of, their spawn. They're trying to finish spawning, and you're invading that area. Their bed is right there, so they're going to attack, and oftentimes it's very ferocious attacks. They're not kind, they're trying to kill it. So that is my two approaches, and that's mine. And as you all can tell, I'm starting to kind of get away from some of the soft baits. I will keep a soft bait on the boat, and we'll get into that in the next video. I'm going to try to do another video on the post spawn, and then we'll do another segment for the summer months. But as you can kind of tell from my personal style of fishing, and that's all I can really speak to, I like to throw hard baits. I like to keep hard baits. Typically, I can move faster and cover water with them a little bit easier. So that's just my personal style. By no means is that all you can do. You can definitely take soft baits and do great with them. It's just my personal style. I really like throwing hard baits. But back to kind of what I was saying, those are really the two approaches that I take during the spawn. Now, where am I fishing during this period of year? So you're following the bass on the spawning flats, you're following to the backs of the coves, you're following them to the areas with like less runoff water, because that runoff as it comes in, it's going to push their eggs out and they're not going to like that. So you're wanting areas that is a little bit more protected, a little bit more sheltered, a little bit off current. You know, like I've spoken as far as like our area, and I do want to keep it to that because not necessarily our area, but highland reservoirs, just because that's where my experience lies. I don't really have experience on the river and the lowland reservoir systems. So on those highland reservoirs for your smallmouth, they're really going to focus on that slate rock, or at least in my experience, they really like slate. 45-degree angle banks, thereabouts. You know, sometimes steeper. They'll spawn pretty steep on steep banks. Smallmouth are their own creature. You know, your largemouth are going to go a little bit more even flatter, more, you know, gradual slopes. They like their pebble and rock too, of course, but a little bit different kind of rock. And they'll go as shallow as they want. So that's the two different things, but definitely looking at the backs of the coves, you know, those flatter kind of banks, and then just looking for the different types of rock. So that has basically got the spawn. This one's kind of short because personally I only worry about a handful of baits, and it's really just kind of what I'm in the mood to do that day. If I'm really in the mood to actually kind of slow down and kind of jig fish, I go the dark sleeper and I'd go the mission fish. If I'm in the mood to throw, if I'm in the mood to throw my baits, you know, the glides, the wakes, I'm gonna parallel bank, even in those same areas. I'm still staying on those shallow cuts. I'm just approaching it a little bit differently versus jigging and trying to bring it through the bass's bed. I'm going to parallel that bank, I'm going to throw up, and I'm going to go, and I'm going to work either that glide or that wake over top of them. And I'm going to do my best to incorporate several pauses, and this is where it comes to, especially with the glide bait, because glide baits are subsurface. You want a slow sink because it's going to look more natural to that bass. Because a bait that does this doesn't look right. You know, if you're able to get that kind of action going and it's sinking really, really fast, if you pause it, most fish, I mean, don't get me wrong, they can swim up and down the water column pretty quick, but it just, if you're fishing 3 foot of water and you go there, you're probably going to get hung, especially where I live with so much timber in the water. So be thoughtful of that. If you're going to fish a glide, I would recommend a slow sink. Now, I had a discussion just the other day on glide baits with their sink rate. And this is going to come from 2 points of view, the builder and the angler. Okay. So when the builder makes a glide bait, and it doesn't matter if it's mine or if it's, you know, a KGB, if it's a clutch, if it's a, you know, a hog father or a tater hog. Sorry, the hog father's the bait, but a tater hog, it doesn't matter. We all have a bull shad. We all have to build our bait, and we have to weigh it, and they get weighed in a certain water temperature. Okay, me personally, and I can only speak for myself, I weigh my baits for production baits between 60 and 70 degrees, because that allows you to have baits that you can fish in the wintertime. You can just, you know, add lead around the hook shank, or you can fish them in the summertime and you can speed up a little bit, but they're not going to sink so fast. So that's my thought. That's how I do it for 60 and 70 degree water. But now here is the part on you as an angler. When I build my bait, I build the Jethro to be fished on 15-pound test copolymer line. The reason I say that is because if you fish fluorocarbon sinks. Fluorocarbon is naturally going to start making this bait actually have an increased sink rate over the copolymer. Copolymer, it floats to a degree. It's not as bad as mono, and the other thing is your line diameter. You know, we all talk in terms of 15 pound, 17 pound, 20 pound, 22 pound test. You know, even some people throw like 30-pound big game. Okay, but look at the line diameter of that. The thicker the line diameter, the more drag through the water, which will keep the bait higher. So if you have a bait that sinks fast naturally, increase your line diameter on your spool and it will help slow that down. It may not be perfect for what you're trying to achieve because the bait just may be such a fast sink, even that line diameter change won't help. But ultimately, if you have a bait that's sinking really fast, or vice versa, if you have a bait that sinks really slow, if you're okay with changing line size, the line diameter size, you may be able to help yourself there. You know, definitely if you've got a bait that floats, or it's a super slow sink, painstakingly slow sink, you know, changing line will do that. You can change to fluoro and more than likely it'll slow sink the way you want it to. Okay, but I know a lot of people like braid. Don't really blame them. Baits, you know, these baits aren't cheap. I mean, no baits. When you buy a custom made bait, you know, the builder's got to put the time, so all the labor and then plus materials into building this. So these baits aren't cheap because, and these are, you know, the builders that I just mentioned, you know, they are made in America baits. They're, you know, made here. So that you've got that that extra price tag typically that comes with it being custom because it's handcrafted, it's custom, and it's very labor intensive because each one of them has had to be hand tuned by that individual. You know, I know Mike Buka, he's got his test tank that you see on Instagram. You've got Clutch, they've got a test tank. A lot of people have test tanks. You know, some of us, myself included, we're running to the lake to go do a swim test versus having a big test tank that we can swim the bait and check it. Because that's also very important to me. I don't want a bait to go out the door that I personally didn't look at. So that's some of the thought processes as far as your line, as far as how that bait is going to go in the water. This is when slow sink, well, I shouldn't say slow sink. This is when rate of fall really is going to come into play. And it's not so much the rate of fall, it's what a lot of people call the rate of stall, S-T-A-L-L. You want that bait to sit there, because when it sits there and those fish get to look at it and they really think, well, I don't know if it's real or not, but it's in my territory and it's over my bed and this is my eggs here, I'm going to kill it. You want that bait to sit there, and you want it to be able to just really mess with their mind to where it's telling them, I am in your space and I'm going to eat your eggs. I don't know why it works, but that has been my experience, that you want that slow rate of stall to where you can let that bait just hang there, and it aggravates those bass. So I know that you all can tell that, like, I've talked a lot more over the glide baits and the wake baits than I have the soft baits where you jig fish. But, you know, personally, this is where I spend my time. I prefer throwing hard baits. Secondly, I prefer throwing my own baits if I can, and the fish are shallow enough, and the spawn, they're the shallowest they'll ever be all year. So that's why I am passionate about fishing like hard baits this time of year, because this is when I get to start fishing my baits again. This is when I get to start fishing the way I love to fish. Put a big bait on and you have 4 rods with 4 different big baits. You know, I'm sure, I mean, that's just where I kind of limit out. I think I've got maybe 5 big bait rods. I think that's what we went through during my rod breakdown. But that's my setups as far as how I would approach the spawn. But I know this has been a little bit of another long video, but I appreciate everyone taking some time to watch today's video, and I hope you have a lot of success this year in the spawn. I know that can be a very challenging time, and it has been for me even historically, you know, way back, and everybody has down years, but it can be challenging just because the fish are very focused on the spawn. They're not focused on eating right at that time. So the way that I look at that, you approach it one of two ways. You try to actually infiltrate the nest with your bottom baits, or you try to annoy them and get them to bite with like your, let's just call them the reactionary side. But I appreciate everyone taking some time. Please leave me your comments down below. I love to read them. I love to interact with everyone. If anyone's got some additional baits that maybe I've left out or maybe I haven't thought of, I'd love to try them this year also. I'm trying to put this video out about a month in advance so that, you know, as many people as can watch this video and, you know, utilize the information if they choose to. Because ultimately that's all I can do is present it, and maybe you enjoy it and want to go this direction. But either way, I hope you have a tremendous amount of success this spring. We are just now getting into the pre-spawn in my area, but I want to get out the spawn information as soon as I can. So if you've enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate those likes. That helps the YouTube algorithm realize that people are watching the video, and it helps get the message out to more. So I really appreciate each and every single person that has given me thumbs up in the past, and I hope you'll do the same for this video. Please hit that little subscribe button and notification bell down below. That is really just helping us grow the channel. It's completely free. It helps you stay up to date with any new videos that I put out. I try my best to put out new videos every first and third Monday of each month, and I add in some bonus videos across the month. But I really enjoy doing the bonus videos too, so I try to do as many as I can. And with that, I hope everyone's had a enjoyable time watching today's video. I really appreciate you taking some time to watch the video. So if you don't care, leave me any comments or questions that you have below, and I'll see you in the next video.